you came to our country about 20 years ago. You know our people here, the culture here. It's very honor for us to have you to share a little bit about who you are and the work you do for our audience. Would you please do that honor for us?
Sure. So, um, so I was born and raised in a small town in northern Wisconsin, in the Midwest of the United States, and it was about just 6,000 people in the town, and I was raised in a very conservative Lutheran church in the Protestant religion. And when I was in about the seventh grade, I think it was, I was asked to write a paper about who I wanted to be when I grew up, and and so at that time I wanted to be a Lutheran minister. I thought I was going to be a minister. So and I was age 13, and so the church that I went to was just was a short walk from my home. It was just really around the block. It was a block and a half away. So, and that's what I thought I was going to do from age 13 to 26. I thought I was going to end up being a Lutheran minister. And and one of the things that happened right about that age as well is I found myself starting to be attracted to girls. And this attraction in my conservative religious upbringing, I saw that as lust, and so it was something that was wrong. I saw it as a wrong thing, and so I was feeling guilty about this attraction. I didn't know what to do about that. And there's a line in the Bible that says if your eyes cause you to sin, it would be better to poke your eyes out and enter into heaven blindfolded, essentially, or blind, than to spend the rest of your life in hell. So this real extreme anxiety came over me, and I literally thought at one moment of poking out both my eyes in order to not be so I wouldn't be able to see. And so, because my whole fear was of going to hell. And so I actually had a scissors in my hand because I thought if I just poked out one eye, that wouldn't help because I could still see I could still see girls with the other eye. So I thought if I did it with the scissors, I could do both eyes at the same time. So what's important about this is to realize how anxious I was and how I was interpreting a God who would be very punitive if you just didn't do everything right or think everything right. So when I was 16, so 3 years later, I was at a Lutheran church camp, and I had my first really significant shift in my sense of myself and relationship to God or to a deity. And that was that I was somehow loved in spite of my attraction to girls. And that so I was loved, and so there was this sense of unconditional love that I was living in, and it just was such a relief in my life. And I was very excited about this, and I thought, oh, now this is a good reason to be a Lutheran minister, so I can share this with people, right? so that proceeded to be a part of my life. I still thought I was going to be a Lutheran minister on through college. Just as I was graduating from college, it was in 1965, I became aware of what I would now call a mystical experience. But then I just called it an awareness. It's like a shock. It didn't come to me like as a rational, thoughtful deduction from my experience, like therefore this must be true. It came like just an awareness that came just to me out of essentially thin air. And the awareness was that God loves everyone, and the implication of the Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was that nobody was going to hell, that everybody was loved, and so that life was headed towards life rather than towards death and significant punishment for a lot of people. So it was a universalist theology. All of us, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Buddhist, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, or it doesn't matter, Muslim, doesn't matter. Everyone is loved, and that now I'm really excited, right? I was so excited I couldn't even think about anything else. So I read the New Testament front to back, and I thought, if this is true, it's going to show up in there somewhere. I'm just not creating this, you know. So when you look for it, it shows up all over the place, right? So once you assume that's possible, that everyone is loved unconditionally, then it can be found rather readily. So I wrote a very small book in 1965. It was only about 40 pages or so, and the book was called All.
Oh,
Yeah. So everybody's included in God's grace, right? And I thought, and I was headed towards going to seminary yet, but I had worked all of the summers that I was in school in college. I went to a camp, a summer camp in upstate New York for kids from low-income neighborhoods of New York City. So this would be Harlem, East Harlem, the South Bronx, Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, and Red Wing Training School, a reform school. So we had these kids coming to this camp. They would come for 2 weeks and then return home or to the Red Wing Training School. And I did that every summer. And we had a staff of about 70, and there were usually 14 or 15 of them from other countries that were working on the staff. So it was highly diverse in terms of the people who were on the staff. And so I just loved it. So every summer of college, that's where I went to work. And when I was a senior in high school, by the way, my senior paper that I wrote was about the causes of juvenile delinquency. So I was curious about how is it that some young people get identified as juvenile delinquents or end up in jail or in reform school or something, and some of us don't. It's like, what's the difference? So I was very interested in social patterns and how we become who we are, and what's the influence of society on that. So I wrote my paper on that. So working with these kids from low-income neighborhoods was kind of an extension of that, because I was doing that all my summers of college, right? So when as I was in my final summer before my senior year of college, I was talking with other camp staff there. I said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to just get with a small group of people, and we would all just move into the south side of Chicago, which was a low-income neighborhood, right? And so I was aware of that neighborhood. And I said what we would do is we would just get regular jobs, but we would live in the community. We would be sitting in on meetings, finding out what was going on in the community, what people were doing, what were the issues, what were the concerns. And as I was sharing that with different counselors, trying to get them to join me in doing this, one of them, Johnny Weber, said, Barry, my father is running a program like that in East Harlem. And I said, he is? And he said, yes. He said, if you want to do that, you just got to call my father. So I said, well, give me his phone number. So I called up his father, and he was one of the founders of the East Harlem Protestant Parish, and he had been living in East Harlem for, I think it was 17 years. Let me see. It was right after World War II that he moved to East Harlem. So anyway, he had been there for a long time, and I called him up, and I said, I'd really like to, I understand you've got this program that, and he said, yes, we do. I said, well, is it possible that I could be in the program? And he said, well, yes, we have room, but the only thing is that the program is actually a program of Union Theological Seminary. And I was planning at the time to go to Luther Seminary in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I hadn't even heard of Union Seminary, which is, I found out later, a very well-known seminary, but I hadn't heard of it before. And I said, well, so how do I get into Union Seminary? so I'll give you the application. He sent me an application form. And so this is everything's happening by snail mail now. There's no computers or anything. So I get the application and mail it in. I get accepted to Union Seminary and into this East Harlem internship program. Now, in this program, we were to live in East Harlem. There were 10 of us in the program, and there were 4 couples and 2 single men, and we were either between college and seminary, or they were taking a year out of seminary to do this, what was called a secular internship. So you had to get a secular job, you had to live in East Harlem, and you had to spend time getting involved in the community, learning about what life is like for the urban poor. And we were reading books and studying about about life of the urban poor and politics, both domestic and international. So it was and we would meet 2 nights a week to talk about what we were learning from our experience and the books we were reading. So we were reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, for example, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, Life and Death of Great American Cities, and we were just in that process. The job that I got was I was working at Equitable Life Insurance Company in Midtown Manhattan, and I was directing a program that they had created to take young people who had dropped out of high school. They would have them come to Equitable and work for 20 hours a week at Equitable, and 20 hours a week they would be in school, and they would get their high school equivalency diploma, and then if they kept their grades up to adequate grades, then they would go, Equitable would pay for them to go all the way through college, working 20 hours a week with Equitable and 20 hours in school. And they would support them going all the way through college. So that was the program that I was in charge of. So again, getting to meet young people who were, trying to transform their lives, who had dropped out of high school earlier and were trying to make a new life for themselves. So all of this was informing my life and my experience, and it was right between. It was I graduated from college in January, so I didn't go to that intern program till the fall. So in that after graduating, what I did was I moved to New York, and that's when I read the New Testament and wrote the book called All, this small book, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just finished writing that, and I thought, well, this is just something that just sort of came to me, and what I need is a strong theological background. So I needed to go to seminary, and I'll rewrite the book after I graduate from seminary. That was the plan. I just set it on the shelf. I didn't need to run around and save everybody because that was already done in my new theology, right? That was a given. So that's what happened. So as I was involved in the Vietnam War. This was 1965 now to 1970. I ended up living in East Harlem for 5 years rather than just the 1 year of the intern program. But during that first year, one of the things I was doing is I was playing flag football with other young men my age in their early 20s and late teens in a schoolyard in East Harlem in my neighborhood. We were playing every Saturday morning. And I was studying the war in Vietnam and getting more and more convinced that it was an illegal war and that we should not be fighting in it. And one of the evenings, as a matter of fact, we had a debate amongst the 10 of us who were in this intern program. We studied the war, and some people were saying, no, we need to be in the war because we need to protect the country from the spread of communism, and so there was this fear that was the primary motivation for people who were supportive of the war. And there was there was another friend of mine who was there, who was debating, saying why he thought the war was illegal and why we shouldn't do it. And so there was this debate going on within our group, and Russ Fletcher was one of the men in the group, and he decided, rather than going back to seminary during this intern year, he decided he wanted to be a writer rather than a minister. And since he thought the war was a necessary war, he decided that it would be, if he could survive the war, to have the experience of being in the war would help him, just in terms of the depth of his experience, to support his writing. So he went to Vietnam, died in Vietnam, and so he was a good friend, and his wife, who was opposed to the war, asked me if I would speak at his funeral, which I did, and so right within that group there was this division of perceptions about whether the war should, whether we should be in the war or not. And but I got more and more convinced that we shouldn't be in the war. And so the other thing that was happening now, while I'm opposed to the war, I'm noticing that these young men that I'm playing football with are being drafted to go to Vietnam. And the reason they're being drafted is because their education that they were getting in East Harlem was not adequate enough to get them into college. And so if you were in college at that time, you could get a deferment. You wouldn't be drafted because you were a college student. But they couldn't avoid the draft because they couldn't get into college. Now, I was a seminary student, so I had a deferment because I was in seminary. So I'm playing with these young men and watching them go off to Vietnam, and then they're coming back, in boxes, and I'm thinking, this is just not fair. This is not right. That they should not have the kind of protection that the rest of us who had the privilege of a college education or being in seminary to not go to Vietnam. So all of these concerns were going around in my head and concern about that. And then there was a group of seminary students at Union Seminary that decided they were going to go down to Washington, D.C. for a protest, and it was going to be led by three people, and it was Rabbi Abraham Heschel, William Sloane Coffin, and Father Robert Drinan. The three of them, during the war, had visited what was the northern part of Vietnam and the southern part of Vietnam while the war was going on, and they came back and they started clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam. And so they had their first gathering in Washington, and a bunch of students from Union Seminary, we got on a bus. They arranged for a couple of bus loads of us to go to be a part of that protest. And when we came, as we were riding back from Washington, it's about a 5-hour drive, bus ride from New York City to Washington, D.C. And so as we were coming back, the main protest that was going on at that time was that we were bombing the demilitarized zone, which was an enhancement of the war and a violation of the Geneva agreements about the demilitarized zone in the first place. So I was thinking, what we as a Christian, one who now is, by the way, in my theology, saying, God loves everyone. And so, I said the place to protest the bombing of the demilitarized zone is at the demilitarized zone. So I called up one of the leaders, Bill Coffin, who at that time was a chaplain of Yale University, and he, I called him up and I said, I was at he was one that had led the gathering in Washington, and I called him up and I said, I've got an idea. I'd like to go organize a group of people to go to Vietnam and protest the bombing of the demilitarized zone from the demilitarized zone. And can you help me get there? And he said, look, Barry, he said, I've been to both the North and the South there, and I don't think anybody's, wants you to go to the demilitarized zone. But if you're really serious about stopping the war, then we just opened an office right there, right next to Union Seminary, for clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam. And our executive director, Dick Fernandez, needs to be out traveling, trying to encourage clergy around the United States to organize and to protest the war. And so, but we don't have an office manager. So if you're really interested, in this, why don't you see if you can apply to be the office manager? I said, okay, so how do I do that? Give me the phone number. So I called up Dick Fernandez, and I got the job. And so I left seminary in order to spend a year. I said, I'd be glad to take a year out to see what we can do to stop the war. And so I was the office manager of clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam. And that's where, because I was the office manager, Dick Fernandez, the director, allowed me to sit in on the board meetings. And what was significant about that is who was on the board. So on this board were religious leaders, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. There were no Muslim leaders, no imams in that group, but there were Catholics and Protestants and Jews. And that was, and so I was meeting with them as they were talking about policy and everything. And I was in the meeting in which Dr. King and Andrew Young, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was invited to come to one of our board meetings. And the president of Union Seminary was on the board. So now I'm sitting in the president's office. I'm a dropout of Union Seminary. And so I'm this seminary dropout sitting in the board meeting with the president of Union Seminary, and Dr. King comes to this meeting, and we had a discussion with him about whether he was going to come out against the war or not. So, and this is 1967, and what's really interesting about this is that there were a number of reasons that we guessed that Dr. King hadn't come out against the war yet, because we knew he was an advocate for nonviolence, in the tradition of Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and so he knew when he came to the Clergy and Laity Concerned Board meeting that we were going to ask him to come out against the war, right? Because that's what we're asking every clergy person to do. So as we're sitting in this meeting, there were about 12 of us there, or so, and Andrew Young was with him. Andrew Young was his sort of right-hand person. They almost went everywhere together as a pair. So Dr. King and Andrew Young were there, and we to start off, he said, Bill Coffin, by the way, just another connection here, Bill Coffin knew Dr. King because Bill Coffin was leading bus rides for students at Yale, where he was a chaplain at Yale University. He was organizing students to take bus rides to sit-ins in southern states during the sit-ins in the early 60s for the right to eat at any restaurants you wanted to eat, where there were black people were not allowed to eat in certain restaurants. So white students were coming in buses from northern schools, coming and joining them in the protests and sitting in at restaurants with black people and getting themselves, some of them, killed. But in that time period, there was a relationship developed between Bill Coffin, the chaplain of Yale, and Dr. King because of that, him joining him in the sit-ins in the southern United States. So when Bill Coffin was talking with Dr. King in this meeting, and Dr. King now was the founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and they were dealing with poverty and racism in the United States. And so when one of the things that we understood was that during the war there were people who were supportive of the war, people who were funding the war in Vietnam, putting money towards the war and support for the war, who were also supporting the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So The concern was if he came out against the war, some of the funding for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference would go away because he had taken sides on the war, and so they would lose some of their major funding to support the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The other thing was that Dr. King had a very significant relationship with President Johnson, because President Johnson is the one who had arranged to sign the Civil Rights Act for in '63, the Civil Rights Act. So the question was, is Dr. King going to come out against the war, lose significant money for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference from people who were funding them, who supported the war, and undermine his relationship with President Johnson because it was President Johnson, was the president at the time of the war. And Dr. King asked each one of us before he spoke. He said he would like to just hear from everybody there. So each one of us, including me, had a chance to talk to Dr. King about what we thought was going on and why we thought it would be important for him to come out against the war. So, and I hadn't met Dr. King before this time, but I was involved in the 1963 March on Washington, in which Dr. King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. So I had been at that march. That was my first demonstration around civil rights issues. So I had been at that demonstration, and now I'm seeing him face to face, because that was '63, this is '67. So 4 years later, I'm in the president's office with him. So it was very moving for me to be involved in those meetings and to be with those religious leaders as a young seminary dropout. He did come out against the war, and as the office manager, I was the one to be behind the scenes organizing the whole coming out at Riverside Church. And the way that came about, by the way, is that Dr. King, after we went around and everybody talked, he said, his response was, "Well, it's true that we are concerned, or the people in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that my board at SCLC is concerned about losing funding from people who support the war, and concerned about us harming the relationship with President Johnson." And the third thing was that he was going to be accused, the minute he came out against the war, he was going to be accused of speaking out of his lane, right? So he's supposed to be about poverty and diversity, not about international affairs. And so he said, so all of these concerns are true, and at the same time, there are just, with all of the pain and suffering of Vietnamese people, citizens and soldiers, and U.S. soldiers that are there, all of this dying, I just can no longer remain silent. I am opposed to this war, and so I have to come out in opposition to it. And so he said, the question is not whether I'm going to come out, but how. And so we had this conversation in which we said to Dr. King, well, what are some thoughts you have about coming out? And he said, well, one of the things it was Bill Coffin was the first one. He said, well, one of the ways we could help protect the Southern Christian Leadership Conference is to not have you come out as a representative of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You could join the board of clergy and laity concerned about Vietnam, and then you could just speak as a member of our board. And so that would be you coming out as a member of clergy and laity concerned. I'm a fellow clergy who's concerned, and I'm opposed to the war. So that would be a way to try to insulate SCLC from the impact, the pushback. And so he said that would be, that sounds like a good idea. And so there's everybody around the room was just looking at each other and nodding their heads. And so Bill Coffin said, "Welcome to the board." And so now he's a board member in about in 1 minute. And then he said, well, it would be helpful if I did it from a really prestigious church, because this is about clergy and laity concerned. And so Bill Coffin said, what about Riverside Church, which is one of the biggest and predominant churches in all of New York City, Riverside Church, and it's right next to Union Seminary and Jewish Theological Seminary. They're all there right within walk, they're across the street from each other, right? So they're just Dr. King smiled and he said that would be great, and so he ended up coming out against the war, and I was involved in arranging that for the public relations about it, getting the word out, etc., and that announcement. So that was at the heart of my work while I was there. And then what happened was I was, as I mentioned, my playing flag football with these other young men from East Harlem. I thought, I can't accept keeping a draft card when in fact it's not available to the other people I'm playing football with on Saturday mornings. And so I joined what was called the resistance movement. And what we did was I went around to various schools, especially seminaries, but some colleges, but mostly seminaries, and I would have a meeting with them, and I would just ask a couple of questions. One question was, on what basis are you allowing yourself to have a deferment that's not available to the urban poor in our country? It's not available to the people in my neighborhood where I live in East Harlem. And on what basis are you allowing yourself to have that deferment? And if you discover, when you really ask yourself about that, you discover that you cannot accept that inequitably distributed deferment, and you're going to turn it in, then there's another question, and that is, what are you going to do when you're drafted? I said, and now you're facing the same question that the urban poor are facing, which is, what am I going to do when I get drafted? And your options are, I can go and get drafted and be sent to Vietnam. I can refuse induction. If I refuse induction, I'm subject to 5 years in jail and a $10,000 fine for refusing induction, or I can flee the country and go to Canada or some other country. And that's the option that everyone had who was facing that. And I said, so I've made my decision about these. I said, my first is, I'm not going to keep my deferment. I'm going to turn it in. And if you don't possess your draft card, that is the violation. You have to possess a draft card. If you don't, you're subject to 5 years and $10,000 fine, right? The 5 and 10. Also, anybody who aids and abets you in that is also subject to 5 years and $10,000 fine. So I ended up turning in my draft card, and we had 27 other students at Union Seminary who turned in their draft card, and this was in 1967, and it was in August. I think it was August 16th of 1967, and I turned in my draft card it was nationwide, a national draft card turn-in, and so a year later, I had finished my year of working at Clergy and Laity Concerned, and I was in the summer and planning to go back to Union Seminary in the fall. And for that summer, my wife and my first wife Carol and I we went back to that we went back to that camp in upstate New York that I used to work with all the times in college. And so I just got there. We were starting up, and this was in June. I got a notice from the draft board that I was to report for induction on July 5th of 1967. It was either the 3rd or the 5th. It was one side of the 4th of July, and I can't remember which, but it was right around the 4th of July. So I'm working at this camp, and I think, okay, so I'll have to go down and refuse induction. So I called up Dick Fernandez, the director of Clergy and Laity Concerned, and said, I'm going to go to for my induction. I got my call. he knew I had refused induction, that I had turned in my draft card and everything. And I said, so I'm going to report at the Whitehall Induction Center on the 5th of July, and I just wanted you to know. And he said, well, thanks for letting me know, Barry. And so the next day I get a call from him and at the camp, and he said, Barry, I want you to know that we're making some plans for your induction refusal. And I said, well, what are those plans? And they said, well, first of all, the induction center is in Lower Manhattan, down by Wall Street. And there's one of the oldest churches, if not the oldest church in New York City, is Trinity Parish, Wall Street. And so he said, we're going to, my induction refusal was scheduled, my induction time, I think, was scheduled for 8 in the morning, something like that, 8 or 8:30. It was, and it was supposed to report for induction. And he said, we're going to meet at 7 in the morning and have a worship service at Trinity Parish, Wall Street. And then the congregation, those who gather, are going to walk. It's about 3 or 4 blocks to the induction refusal. We're going to walk there and protest outside, and we're going to have some people chained to you, if that's okay. And I said, chained to me? And he said, yes, because they want to be aiding and abetting you in refusing your induction, right? So they want to put themselves subject to the same consequences, which is they would be charged with 5 years and a $10,000 fine because they're aiding and abetting me in refusing. And so that's what happened. So we had and they had, major media was there. All the major media networks were there televising the worship service, and then our walking down to the Whitehall Induction Center. And there were about, I don't know, I think there were like maybe 250, 300 people that were there in front of the induction center, because we'd advertised it in the New York Times. There was a small ad in the New York Times: come to Barry Johnson's induction refusal at this time in Trinity Parish, Wall Street. So they knew we were coming. They knew we were coming because it was in the paper. And so this group of people showed up there. Wasn't large, but there was a relatively significant number out front. And so they were all then chained to me. And the people chained to me were my wife Carol, and by the way, our son Luke was 2 weeks old at the time. So for me, this was really significant, because I thought people who were refusing induction were getting the 5 years, but they would often get out in 3 years. But I thought I was going to miss the first 3 years of my son's life for refusing induction. And so it was really a significant time, because somebody else was, my 2-week-old son Luke was there, in this little, this little bundle. And so Carol was chained to me. Dick Fernandez, who was the director of Clergy and Lay Concern, was chained to me. And Rabbi Balfour Brickner was chained to me. And there was a woman by the name of Mrs. Robert Ransom. Can't remember her first name, Mrs. Ransom. Her son had been killed in Vietnam. He fought in Vietnam. He was sending letters to her that he was opposed to the war, but he was afraid to let that be known because of what might happen to him. But they knew, as parents, that he was opposed to the war. Then they get a message that he'd been killed in the war. And so now they're upset, and they're thinking, well, now we're opposed to the war, because, and we can be clear about that, because our son was opposed to the war and he died there. And so they happened to be, Bill Coffin, again, the chaplain of Yale, happened to be at a bar mitzvah in New York City, right before my induction refusal. I think it was the weekend before my induction refusal. And he was talking with both of them, this young man's father and mother who died in Vietnam, and she said to Bill Coffin, because they knew he was opposed to the war, with Clergy and Lay Concern, and they shared about that they just found out that their son had been killed, and they said, we want to do something to oppose this war, and do you have any, what can we do? What do you suggest? And he said, well, there's an interesting opportunity here that this next week this coming week, there's this young man from Union Seminary who lives in East Harlem who's got a 2-week-old baby who's going to be refusing induction with people chained to him. and she said, can I be chained to him? And he said, I'll call and ask. So I get this call. Now it was like maybe 2 days before my induction refusal. And I think it was right in the middle of the week, and this was on the weekend. So I get this call, and he tells me about Mrs. Ransom wanting to be chained to me. And I said, well, of course, you know. Mr. Ransom is a senior vice president at IBM, right? So these people were chained to me. So we get to in front of the building, and I knock on the door of the induction center, and they open the door, and the cameras are over our shoulders, and now all these people are chained right in front of the door. The cameras are catching all of this, and I said to them, I've come to refuse induction, and these people chained to me are aiding and abetting me in my induction refusal. So we want all this to be on the media, right? I'm refusing, they're aiding and abetting. Let's be clear about this. The man who was in charge of the induction center, the commander there, had on his full dress uniform. When you're in full dress uniform, right, you've got all your recognition stuff, all your paraphernalia that shows, you know, all the awards you've accumulated over your military career. So he had his full dress uniform on because he knew we were coming, because it was in the New York Times. So he had a formal statement that he read, you are required to to step forward and If you do not, this is what will be the consequences. He read the statement, and I said, you've got 3 options here. I said, one is you can cut these chains that connect me to the people who are chained to me, and I'll come in alone and refuse induction. Or you can let us all come in and we'll all refuse induction together. Or we'll just forget about it and I'll go home because I'm not going anyway. And I said, I'll give you a half an hour to think about it, and I just shut the door. Wow. And I turned around, and for the next half hour, all of the people shared why they were opposed to the war and why they were chained to me and why they were aiding and abetting me, right? So after that half hour was up, of people just, each of them, giving a few minutes. So it was maybe 20 minutes, or it was a very short time. So everybody had their chance to say why they were, including me, why I was, refusing induction, etc. I turned around, knocked on the door, and I said, your time is up. You got 3 choices. I read the choices. He read me the document, and I said, well, it's clear to me that you don't want me here, and I don't want to go anyway, so we're just going to go home. And so I shut the door, and I turned around, and I said to them, they have, this is the decision, these are the choices I gave them, this is what's happened, so it looks like they don't want me, and I'm not going anyway, so let's go home. And everybody cheered, and I left. So, and I haven't heard from them since.
Wow.
So that was 1968, July 5th, I think, 5th or 3rd, one of those 2 dates. I'm pretty sure it was the 5th. So now, as I'm going back to school, back to Union Seminary in the fall, and things keep happening at seminary that I would read about that that were just so preoccupying me that I thought, I can't just stay here in seminary with this happening. I've got to do something about it. So I kept kept leaving seminary. An example was I had just gotten back at seminary again, and there was and I'd already refused induction now, so this would have been now the fall of 68. And by the way, 1968 was when Dr. King was killed. There was the Democratic elections, the elections in 1968, and so another piece that happened to me that sort of informed my awareness was I went to the Democratic Convention in 1968, and I joined. Clergy and Laity Concerned was protesting the war. We weren't involved in the interface with the police, where there was a lot of beatings and stuff like that, but we were protesting the beatings that took place among protesters in front of the hotel in Chicago, the main hotel where a lot of people were staying who were part of the convention. And the arrangement at the convention was that there was a perimeter that was about, it was like maybe a block or two away from the convention center itself, that was blocked off. You had to have some kind of ID, identification, that showed you were either a resident in that neighborhood that was circled off, or you had a delegate's pass to be at the convention. If you didn't have one of those, you couldn't be in there from 8 o'clock in the morning until I think it was about 9 o'clock at night or something like that. There was this window till after the convention was over, in other words. So what we did is we went there really early in the morning, and we got in closer to the convention site, and we just sat down in a peaceful protest of the beatings that some of the protesters had gotten the night before who were protesting outside the hotel. And we were protesting those beatings, police brutality beatings, and we all got arrested while we were there, because they said, you have to move now because the perimeter has moved to the 2-block perimeter outside, right? We were able to get close during those hours where it was not being checked, but now they said you have to leave because you don't have a pass to be this close to the convention. We refused, so I was put in the Kent County Jail. Now, when I was in the Kent County Jail, I was put in with 2 young black men who had been in the Kent County Jail they were arrested. Now, this is the end of August. They were arrested in April for violating a curfew. They were protesting the killing of Dr. King back in April. So they were in jail for 5 months, still waiting to come to face charges for something they had done that. So again, the vulnerability that they had as young black men, as distinct from me, the white young man there, was just outrageous. So I spent the night with them, and one of the things I feel most embarrassed about and ashamed of is that the next morning, I had connections with the Clergy and Laity Concerned that held that demonstration that we got busted, and so we were all arranged to get out of jail. That was all, that was all arranged to help us get out. What I wished I had done is stayed in jail with them until they got out with me, but I did not. I just didn't. It didn't dawn on me. Everything had been set up, in advance. That if you get busted, this is what you do. This is the number you call, and we'll get you out. You'll probably be in jail overnight, but we'll get you out the next day. We'll have somebody on it. But that's what in hindsight, that's what I wished I had done. To just say, no, I'm not leaving. They might have thrown me out anyway. I did go to the media to describe this scene that I had discovered. There were 2 young black men in this jail cell who hadn't yet been had an opportunity. They weren't even, they were just there. hadn't had a time in court yet. So um, so anyway, so that was, these are all experiences that happened there. So I'm out of there. This is fall 60. I'm back in seminary again. And I'm in about 1 month worth of seminary, and I'm reading the New York Times one morning, and I discover that there are 27 young men who are in the Presidio stockade in San Francisco, who are being charged with, have just been convicted of, I forget what the charge was, but they were sentenced to 10, some of them 10 years and some 14 years of hard labor and a dishonorable discharge. And I'm reading this, and I knew about the Presidio stockade because we had members of Clergy and Laity Concerned About Vietnam who were visiting people in the Presidio stockade. These were young men who were refusing to go to Vietnam, right? So they were in the stockade, right? Now, while they were in this stockade, one of the members, his name was Ralph Bunch, I think was his name, but he was mentally not sound, and so he was experiencing some sort of emotional anxiety. He was upset. He's right in the courtyard, in the middle of the stockade. So there's walls all the way around this courtyard, right? This stockade, with men with guns up on the borders. He's unarmed. He's walking across the courtyard, saying, "I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave," and he gets shot in the back of the head by a guard from the rim on the wall. And they do an investigation and clear the guard of any wrongdoing. And so there were 17 people who were being in the stockade. They were prisoners in the stockade, who the morning after it was announced that this person was cleared of all wrongdoing. They had to line up every morning at the stockade at like 6 in the morning or sometime early in the morning. They had to all line up, and then they had a roll call, and you had to step forward when your name was called, right? And so that was their way to document that no one had escaped during the night or whatever. So that was the regular, the roll call. Everybody stepped forward. 17 refused to step forward. Instead, they all walked forward together and sat in a circle and locked their arms, sitting in a circle, and saying, "We shall overcome." And they said they refused to cooperate until somebody investigates this judgment that it was okay to shoot this other prisoner in the back of the head when he was right in the middle and not being a real threat to anybody. And so I read this in the New York Times. These guys had various ranges of penalty, but they were going to get a dishonorable discharge, and they had from 10 years to 17 years of hard labor. Different amounts that different people had. So I'm thinking, oh, I can't let this stand. I've got to do something. So I called up some people I knew from San Francisco who were involved, who used to visit the stockade, and I said, "What's going on there?" And they said, "Well, Barry, we're writing a white paper to describe exactly what went on, and we want to bring that to Congress people in Washington, D.C., but we don't have anybody in Washington, D.C. to kind of coordinate this effort we're trying to get protests around the country to come into Washington, D.C., and those protests will be then, and along with a white paper and people, signing these protests and getting phone calls into Congress to do an investigation of this." And I said, "Well, I could go to Washington, D.C." So I leave. And I talk with my wife Carol, and she's working, by the way, full time with Women's Strike for Peace against the war in Vietnam. So both of us were in this anti-war movement up to our eye teeth, and we didn't have a lot of money, but it was relatively inexpensive to live in East Harlem, so that part was good. And I told her about the Procedure 27, and I said, they've asked me to go and set up an office there, and so I'm going to go. And she said, we don't have any money to even get you to Washington. I said, I'll take care of that. I said, I will not spend any of our money, getting there or living there or whatever, so I won't do that. So I get on the train, and I get on the train from New York to Washington, and the conductor goes through and wants my ticket. And I said to him, I said, I do not have a ticket, but I promise that I will pay within 3 days. I will pay the ticket. All I want from you is the name of the address to which I should mail the money, because I will pay it, and so he did. He said, okay. So I paid the money, and we created an office there, set up a phone bank, and we got, and I had different, because with Clergy and Laity Concerned, I've been involved in the national mobilization, of which Clergy and Laity Concerned was a part. So the American Friends Service Committee, Women's Strike for Peace, and other offices, they were giving me the phone numbers of people in their organizations. So we were creating essentially a phone tree, where we just got a bank of phones in an office. It was on Columbus Circle in Washington, and calling these people from these peace organizations, saying, this is what's happening, we need you to call your representatives. And anyway, so that's what I was doing, and then and we won. They all got all the charges got dropped against all 17 of them. So now I'm doing things like this, and finally my wife Carol said to me, she said, Barry, normally we came here to East Harlem for a 1-year internship program. It's 5 years later. We've got 2 kids, and she said, so normally a seminary is a 3-year program. I'm wondering, how far are you along in your 3-year seminary program? And I said, I don't have a clue. I said, I'll go ask. So I asked, and I discovered I had 1 year's worth of credits after 5 years. So she says to me, she said, well, maybe your ministry that you is more about what you've been doing the last 5 years than what you imagine you're going to do if you graduate and be a minister in some church, right? And I said, wow. I said, I think, good point, Carol. So then I thought, well, if my ministry is more about what I have been doing the last 5 years, then what does that mean for me now? What do I want? I thought, I'd like to be the best change agent I could possibly be. And then I thought, rather than spending all of my time responding to things from systems that are not working well, that are working in harmful ways, I would like to understand how to create systems that work well for everyone, right? So I thought, well, then I need to get some training about how organizations develop and grow and how to create. I'd read The Life and Death of Great American Cities, so I knew something about creating citizens that work well for everybody. And so I thought, that's what I want to do. So I thought, so we decided that we were gonna, both of us were from the Midwest, so we decided we were going to move to the Midwest, and we were going to we were going to work at a camp. I'd gotten a job working at a camp for Lutheran kids in Michigan, right here. I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now. And so this camp was outside of Grand Rapids, and I was the director of the camp. And we were planning to, after the summer was over, we were going to go back to our apartment in East Harlem and get our stuff and move to some place in the Midwest. And there was, while I was looking at the Grand Rapids Press one morning while working at this camp in the summer, there was a cross burning on the lawn of a high school. And I thought, wow, the Klan is active in Grand Rapids, the Ku Klux Klan. And so I did some research and discovered that Michigan had, at that time, this would have been 1970, yeah, 1970. That the Klan at that time, Michigan had the second largest Klan of any state in the country outside of Georgia. More than Louisiana, Mississippi. So I thought, well, and then I did some more research kind of on Grand Rapids, and I discovered that Grand Rapids was used by a lot of people as a microcosm of the country for marketing, because of the distribution of the population distribution was kind of a microcosm of the country in terms of ratio of Black and Hispanic people, and income, variability and everything. And so marketers would often check marketing. If it would go in Grand Rapids, it would tend to be more distributive. So I thought, hey, Grand Rapids, let's move to Grand Rapids. So that's how we came to Grand Rapids. And the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to get involved in blue collar organizing, which I wasn't familiar with, and I wanted to live collectively. So I wanted to live in a collective because, for two reasons. One is I liked the notion of living inexpensively and collectively, and so we talked with some of the counselors that were at this camp that I was at, and they wanted to be involved in this collective. So we moved into a collective here. There were a number of us in just a big house. And the other advantage of living collectively is you're not vulnerable to being fired from a job because of your politics, because you don't need to make much money. You can easily find some kind of work to support yourself if you have a minimum amount of money you need to make on a weekly basis. So we did that, and then I started a newspaper because the newspaper was so conservative here that some of the news that I wished were going out wasn't going out. So we started a community-based newspaper, and then I got invited through the newspaper and stuff. One of the people who was involved in community services in the community let me know there was a job that was opening up to start a 24-hour crisis phone service, to answer the phones 24 hours a day for people who needed help, and they were looking for a director. They already had one that was working 4 hours an evening from, like, I think it was, from 8 to midnight or something every evening, and staffed with volunteers, but they wanted to go 24/7. So I applied for that job, and I got it. So now I'm able to start an organization. So my whole experiment with that was starting. So I'm now working on starting an organization and learning how can you create an organization that works well for everyone. And also there was another dimension here that I was also involved in in Gestalt, starting to get involved as a Gestalt therapist, and start to get some work in on that. So I ended up being interested in my own personal development. I thought if I want to be a good change agent, I need to start with myself and work out. So I went to some training programs to set up this 24-hour crisis service, and so I got that started, launched, and then I left that. Then I was invited to start and run a residential treatment program for heroin addicts. So it was a second program that I was involved in, and did that. And then I was working when I had just completed that startup of the program for heroin addicts, got that launched, and I was working in another part of that drug rehab program, and I was working in the evening, finishing my 2 years of Gestalt training, and I met a client came in to see me for the first time, and that's the setting where the polarity map emerged. So this is this is all precursor to to when the first polarity map showed up. So so at this point, I'm seeing this woman for the first time, and so I asked her, so what brings you here for this session? And she said, I want to be more like you. And
Wow.
I said, well, you know, she knew me from the community, right? Because I was involved in things in the community. I didn't know who she was, and one does not have to be young or Freud or somebody to know this is loaded. You know, so I said to her, so what does that mean to be more like me? She said, well, you're making a contribution in the community, and you seem to know what you want, and you go after it and do it. And I said, well, I think there's some truth to that. How do you see yourself? And she said, well, I'm not making a contribution. I'm not, I'm not helping anybody. I'm not doing anything. And she said, she said, I don't know. I don't have a sense of what I want to do or how to do it. And if I did know what I wanted to do, I don't know if I would, just have enough, initiative to go ahead and take charge and do it. And so I said to her, I said, well, we'll call her Anne. I said, Anne, I said, there's a couple things missing here.
Mm.
One thing that I have is that you are, when you describe me, it's like your description of me, we could put on one side of my chair. That it's true, but it's a part of me. But there's something on the other side of my chair that we're not talking about.
Um,
And I think that's important. I can see how the polarity map's showing up here now. Okay.
yes.
So I said, for you, I said, also, you have a description of yourself, that is pretty, it's pretty dismissive, it's pretty, but I said, I'm guessing there's another part of you on the other side of your chair that we're not talking about. I said, now, if you could have gotten from where you see yourself to where you see me, you'd have already done it. I think the reason you haven't gotten there is because of these two other spaces that we're not talking about. So what I suggest we do is and by the way, and so actually, and I had the downside of hers and the upside of mine on the same side. So we ended up going through a circle. The first polarity map was actually a circle, not an infinity loop. So, but I said it looks easy because it's real close. It's, they're side by side here, the two sides of our chair. But in fact, I think what we need to do is we need to start where you say you are, and we need to go through these other two spaces first, and then loop around to here, rather than go right across the close end, right? So, so I said, I've got a plan, a strategy see if you'd like to do this. It's an experiment. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, and you can stop at any time if you want to. But this is the thought. We're going to go to these four places, the two sides of your chair and then the two sides of my chair. We're going to stop at each one, and we're going to identify what just what's there for you. And then I want us to create an experience of what you're talking about. So we're going to make a list of what's there, and then we're going to together create an experience of actually being there. What does that feel like? How to experience it? Then we'll move on, and we'll just do that 4 times, and we'll end up over here. And is that okay? And he says, yes, that is. I said, okay. So we start there, and I said, okay, so say again how you see yourself now. And she said, well, I don't, it was poor me. I don't know nothing. I'm not making a contribution to anything or to anyone, and I just don't have enough gumption and energy to pursue what I want to pursue. And as she started talking about this, I said, I think we need to look at what we might name the two chairs. And it sounds like you feel like you're not giving, or giving what you want to of yourself to others, taking care of others, bringing that to others. And I said, so the one chair could be you want to give to others. And I said, so the other chair, the chair that you might be sitting on, is receiving. All right? I said, will that work for you if we talk about giving and receiving? So that was the very first polarity, was giving and receiving, and taking care of self or taking care of others. But it was giving and receiving was what was labeled. The chairs were labeled that, right? So we looked at all this downside of just of receiving and no giving, and so that list was done, and I said, so you're already talking about, you experienced this already. That's why you're here, is because, so we don't have to experience that. You've already got that. And I said, how does this experience? She said, it's terrible. That's why I'm here. She said, it's just awful. And I said, okay. so I had a flip chart that I carried with me, a flip chart pad that we had there in the office. So I picked up the flip chart and I took the page off, all the lists about, no, nothing, nothing to offer, laid it on the floor, took the flip chart to the other side of giving. And I said, so what's here? And she said, I don't have a clue. And I said, well, I think we need to find something, because she had this list. The first one, she had a huge list, right? But nothing here. She couldn't think of a thing. And I said, well, I said, there is something positive about receiving. I said, because if you are unwilling to receive, then nobody's in a position to give to you. And so receiving is actually a gift to the giver as well. And so I said, so I'd like you to think about. I said, when you think about yourself, I said, you're coming here to receive some support from me. And I said, so that's an example of receiving. And I'd like you to think of other things that your willingness to learn. What are some other things that you're aware of that you are receiving in your life right now? People you might be getting something from or whatever. So she started to make a list of the receiving thing. And I said, so I've got a thought about how you might experience receiving right here while we're in this space. And I said, what I would like you to do is, I would like you to, if you would, I would like you to turn your back to me and close your eyes. And what I would like to do is, I would like to give you just a shoulder massage. Just on your upper shoulders, just your shoulder, just a light massage. I said, and what I would do is, I'm going to imagine energy coming from above me, right down through my head, through into my arms and to your body. I'm going to try to send energy to you while I'm massaging your upper shoulders. Now, I didn't want to get into any sort of sexuality stuff or anything like that, so wanted her to close her eyes. We're not seeing each other, we're not looking at each other. She's got her back to me and is paying attention to, I said, I want you to pay attention to just inhaling and just receiving this energy coming from me, from this shoulder massage, right? I said, is that okay with you? And she said, sure. So she turns her back, closes her eyes, and so I just start massaging her shoulders. And I had had some experience with massages, so it was just really a light massage on her shoulder. And she started sort of moaning a little bit and saying, "Ooh, this feels good." And I said, so there really is something, a good upside to this receiving stuff, right? Mm-hmm. She said, "Oh, yeah, okay." I said, "Great." I said, "Okay." So I said, "All right." So I take my flip chart and I go to the next place. So we're going around this circle, right? So we've done the downside and upside of hers. Now we're going to the next space, right next door. I set down the flip chart and I look back at her, and she has stopped right at what would be an imaginary line between that space and this space. And I look at her, and I'm standing there. She's standing over in that space. I'm standing in the new space. And I said, "Ann, what's going on?" She said, "I'm not going there." And I said, "You're not?" and she says, "No, I'm not." And I said, "Well, Ann, what's here?" She said, "That's being a bitch." And I said, "Oh, Ann, what's that? What does that mean, to be a bitch?" She said, "Oh, that's being a know-it-all. That's being arrogant. That's being pushy. That's being cruel." And I said, "Wow." I said, "That's a lot of stuff." I said, "I can see why you don't want to go there." So I went and stood next to her, and I said, "Ann," I said, "we got some choices to make here on this trip. We got 2 places to get to yet. But right now, it's this downside, this what this being arrogant, being pushy, that space. I said, so what I would like to do is to have us, we'll go to that space together, and then we'll just go to that space, then, and we'll act out. We'll make this list of what it means to be, this bitch, what it means to be pushy, arrogant, etc. How that is. Make that list. We'll act it out somehow, and then we'll go to this other space that you wanted to get to. And I said, so you got three choices here. One choice is we'll do that, what I just described. Another choice is we'll just stop here. We'll stop here, and you don't have to go there. You don't have to go there tonight. It was an evening session, or we don't have to go there anytime. I said, but what I will not do is I will not go to the other space and skip this spot. So, because I think there's something important here about moving through that space to get to this other space, and so I think it would be a false trip. So somehow we if you're going to continue the trip, this is the next step in the road, right? And she says to me, she asked me two questions, and she knew the answer to the two questions, which shows you how important they were, because she already knew the answer, but she was checking against it, right? So she said, first question, will you go with me?
Wow.
Yeah. Now this is important. When people are attempting to get enough strength to enter their shadow dimension, their most powerful shadow dimension, they just don't want to do it alone. They need the support of having somebody go with them. That's why therapists can be so helpful. So you'll go with me. I said, yes, absolutely, I'll go with you, and we will we'll do, and I described what we'll do. We'll make the list, I said, we'll make this list of what it means to be arrogant and pushy, and then I'm going to ask you to be the most arrogant, pushy person you can be to me there, so we can experience you being this arrogant, pushy person. Then we'll go to the other place. And she said, well, second question. I don't have to stay there, do I? The other fear is that you're going to get caught there, that you'll never get out of there. So I said, yes, we will leave. We'll do just what we said. You'll make a list. You'll be arrogant and pushy with me, and then we'll move on. She said, okay. So we go there. She makes a list, and this is arrogant, pushy, know-it-all, right? Big list. Now notice the downside of one is know nothing. The downside of the other is know everything. I mean, so that there's a relationship between the two shadow dimensions, the two downsides of a polarity. So we go there, we make this list, and I said to her, okay, Anne, that's really a powerful list. I said, I'd like you to imagine that let's get into the experiencing this. I want you to, you and me to experience you being this arrogant, pushy person. And so I said, I'd like you to think about something that you imagine you know a lot about, and I don't know a thing, right? And I said, it doesn't matter whether I know it or not. I said, but you have a hunch that you know a lot about this, and I probably don't have a clue. I said, and then what I'd like you to do is just be as arrogant and as pushy as you possibly can towards me. Would you be willing to try that? She said, oh, okay. So she starts talking, then she puts her hands on her hips, and she's looking at me more. And then she starts walking towards me, and she just puts her finger in my chest, and she starts jabbing me in the chest really hard. And she's telling me, I'm just, you do not have a clue, da-da-da-da-da. And she's tapping me in the chest, and all of a sudden she starts laughing, and she backs off. And I looked at her and I said, Anne, this isn't totally foreign territory for you, is it? And she said, no, it's not. She said, but when I get here, I'm so embarrassed and ashamed that I've been this arrogant, pushy person that I just run over there. And she was pointing out the downside of receiving, right? And I just sort of go there. And I said, Anne, that's what I do. I said, when I find myself being pushy or arrogant, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, and I go there as well. I said, I understand that trip exactly because I've made it myself, right? And I said, okay, Ann, you've done your job here. So let's go to this final spot, right? Okay, so what's here again? And she said, well, this is making a contribution, knowing what you want and doing it and making a contribution to others. And I said, okay, so let's think about this for a second. And you got out of your apartment and you arranged to come and see me because you wanted help. You knew what you wanted. You came to get it. So in that case, you've actually done some of this, right? You knew what you wanted. You wanted help. You're here. So you do act on pursuing what you want, and being here is an example. I said, well, good point, she says. So I said, Ann, in the last 7 days, just 1 week, I would like you to identify anything you have done for anyone at all in the last 7 days. And because she had made this, she made this list real quickly again, so it was like being helpful and etc. So she started. She said, well, 2 nights a week, 2 evenings a week, I work with some high school students, helping them in remedial work in school to help them, get through, sort of coaching them as a remedial support person. And well, my mother happens to be sick right now, and so I've been bringing her dinner every night. Fixing dinner for her every night. And this list went on. Like she had, just in the last 7 days, she had all this stuff that she'd been doing for other people. And I said, Ann, it seems to me that you are already, in fact, taking care of people. You are doing things. You did come here, assert yourself to come here to be with me. It seems more like you need to just appreciate more of the fact that you are doing a lot of what you said you would like to do. And you're more of who you want to be than you are giving yourself credit for. Does that make sense? And she said, well, yes, it does. And I said, okay. Now, remember when we were over at the beginning of this trip and I asked you to turn around and close your eyes and me give you a massage on the shoulders? I said, how about now you're in the giving position, I'm in the receiving position. How about I turn my back on you, close my eyes, and you give me a massage, and you imagine energy coming down through your head, through your arms, to my shoulders, and I'll imagine my receiving energy and your care from you. Would that be an okay arrangement to just switch roles? She said, sure. So I said, okay. So I turn around, close my eyes, and she starts to rub my shoulders. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes when you really have a lot of energy, your whole body starts to tremble a little bit because there's just so much energy flowing through it. Well, this was happening with her. I could feel her hands just trembling as she's giving me this shoulder massage, And so she does it for just, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds. It wasn't long, 10 or 15 seconds. And with all this trembling, I could just feel it. So I slowly turned around and looked at her, and she's got tears just flowing down her face. She's just sobbing. She's got a big smile, and she says, I'm here. This is where I wanted to be. And it was all over. It was 50 minutes later, and she was where she wanted to be. And I went home that night, and I could not sleep. I thought, this was what happened with Ann as an individual moving from being stuck to getting unstuck would apply to any system size I could imagine. I just went right through. Would this apply to a team? Would this apply to an organization? Would this apply to a nation state? And I thought, yes, it would. And I thought this that was 1975, so 51 years ago. So
Wow.
I thought uh, this is something I want to pursue. And so I've been pursuing it since then. But the essential message, and it fit with Gestalt psychology. So I was just completing my 2 years as Gestalt psychology. And in Gestalt, one of the that's Gestalt in relation to change, it's a paradoxical change model, which says paradoxically, we change most rapidly by allowing ourselves to be where we are rather than trying to be who we are, rather than trying to be who we are not.
Mm.
And so, and the way that shows up in a polarity map is that you're in the downside of one pole and you're trying to go to the upside of the other pole. But what you need to support that, it's like let me take, before we get to that, I want to just jump ahead a little bit and talk about how the circle became an infinity loop in terms of the progression of the polarity map, right? Because it was a number of years later. So this is 1975, and I was using a circle, so it went plus minus in a circle, right? Because that's how we
Mm.
did it. And I was seeing it as on the floor. So my image was we're moving around on the floor. So there wasn't an upside downside visually, except you're moving on the floor with pluses and minuses. But when I'm sharing it with people, I was sharing it with them as a circle, right?
Mm.
And so I was working with a woman. I started doing my consulting work in 1978, 3 years later. And so, and in my consulting, I was sharing this what I called polarity, and it was in the form of a circle. And I was working with a woman who ran a manufacturing company. They were suppliers for major automotive, and they were just approaching, and she'd learned about polarity thinking, and we were talking about them and their leadership and stuff like that. And she said, Barry, we've got a management for renewing the union management contract. It was a union company, and she said, we have never had our contracting discussions be completed before the contract was over, and it's always a real problem because if you go 3 extra months without a contract, now you have to retrofit the contract back and everything. And she said since World War II, we've never had a contract come in on time, so we could just proceed right into the new contract at the end of the old one. And she said, do you
Mm.
think a polarity map would be helpful? And this is in my book, by the way, but I said, yes, I think it would be helpful. And so we looked at what would be a key polarity. I said, well, one of the key polarities is employee interest and company interest. Yeah. I generated this with her. I always generate the maps with the client. So I said, what would be the upside of taking care of company interests, and what would be the upside of taking care of employee interests? And then we went around this circle. We had all those elements. And she was, as we were doing this, she's looking at this thing. It's up on the wall, right? We were
Mm.
writing on this flip chart on the wall. She said, Barry, this would make much more sense to me if the 2 pluses were in the upsides. And I said, what do
Wow.
you mean What do you mean upsides? See, because I was looking at it as though it was on the floor, but she was seeing it on the wall. So there was now an upside and a downside on the wall, physically, right? So the pluses
Mm.
and minuses now needed to be in relation to the upside and downside. And I thought, oh, okay. So this is 17 years later, by the way, from when the first map was created as a circle. So it went for a circle for 17 years. So now I say, well, let's check it out. So I'm tearing the sheet in pieces, and I'm putting them, the 2 upsides and the 2 downsides. And I'm thinking, so what happened to my circle? And I look at it, and as I'm starting the curve, I just realized I'm just starting around. I thought, oh, hot damn it, this is going to be an infinity loop.
Um,
And I thought, oh, this is just gorgeous. And uh, so anyway, Sally Schneider is her name, and she So she was the one that all of a sudden there was a that showed up. So now I can talk with you using the infinity loop, but I just want you to know the infinity loop wasn't what was happening with Anne, but now they've got the infinity loop. If you put Anne's story on the infinity loop, now you can see what's going on, right? So she was in the downside of one pole, the receiving pole. When you go from try to go from the downside of one pole to the upside of the other, it's like trying to run a race, a 100-yard dash in quicksand. The more you move, the more active you are, the more you sink, right? So it's not a good platform to move towards your goal, right? Your goal is to get the upside of the other pole, but it's not the best platform. What she needed to do, she needed to be aware, yeah, this is really messy, but she needed to go like from what would be quicksand to like a solid rock to launch over to the other side. You want to launch in something solid, grab a rock. What is a rock? It's the upside of the very pole that you're in the downside of. It's the historical upside, because the infinity loop is a timeline, right? So the historical strength of hers, was being able to take things in, learning. She was very taking things in, an extreme learner, but she was now in the downside of that about just wanting to move towards being somebody who's more of a giver, more intentional about that, and more obvious, experiencing that more obviously. So once she got to that, when we moved from that downside to the upside of that pole, that was when she became aware of her fear of the downside, right? So she couldn't even see it until she had enough support in the upside of that pole. Then all of a sudden, this shadow dimensions, which she was unaware of, it just appeared. Oh, I'm afraid of this. I'm not going there, right? But she needed the strength of that upside to support her. She needed that awareness to support her in moving through this downside, which is some version of hell for people. Whatever hell is, your most significant fear. You need a solid platform in order to move through that, and you need somebody to support you in going through it, and you need to know that you're not going to get caught there, because you can go to the end, right? So if an organization is stuck in the downside of one pole and it wants to move to the upside of the other pole, it's going to use typical gap analysis to do it, which is identify what's wrong with the present, which is the downside on a polarity map, what's right about the preferred future, which is the upside of the other pole, and now the notion is all you need is a strategy to move from that downside to that upside. Now what's missing? What Anne was asking for, she said, I'm terrible, I'm not able to support anybody. I want to be like you. I know what's wrong with me. I know what's great about you. So she's got the present state, her present state, which is a disaster for her. She's got the future state, which looks like me. And all she wants from me is a strategy to move from there to there. And I suggest to her, there's two parts that are missing. And that's what I'm suggesting to organizations in their effort to make a change. We want to move from centralized to decentralized. But at a head level, we know we have to do it. But at a gut level, they're not doing it. And they can't figure out why they're not doing it, because they're very clear they've used gap analysis. They're very clear what's wrong, very clear about what the preferred future is, the present state and the preferred future state, and then they've just got a strategy to get there. And what I'm saying to them is, well, if what you're trying to do in your change is in fact moving from the downside of one pole of a polarity to the upside of the other pole, then you're not likely to go there because of the fear of the downside of the pole towards which you're going, and because you don't have the support of the historical strength that preceded you getting into the downside of the pole you're in right now. Right? So that all was clear to me that night, that first night, and it fit with the Gestalt notion of paradoxical change. So it was a paradoxical change model, and so I can share more. I've just ran at the mouth trying to cover this sequence, but I wanted you to appreciate the fact that the insight that took place on that one therapy session with Anne in 50 minutes um, just was just a blossoming of something that happened since I was 13, right? I mean, so it's like no, this took a while, you know. Um, so uh, so yeah, um, that was it. And then so since then, I continue to learn about this phenomena. So the map keeps evolving from a circle to the infinity loop. Then there became a greater purpose. As why bother to do this, you know? And then the greater purpose showed up. And then there are action steps to support each upside and early warnings for each downside. And how do you assess it? So all of those things have evolved over time. And another example is I was working with clients with the map, and when the first book came out in '92, there was no and between the two poles, I don't think, and there was no greater purpose. And the infinity loop didn't wrap around the two poles. That all of that happened later, as the thing evolved. But there was a woman who I was explaining this in a session, and she said, Barry, it seems like, and I showed the infinity loop and this stuff, and she said at the first break, she said, Barry, it seems like you're saying you need to do this and this. Is that correct? And I said, yep, you've got it. And she said, well, for me, it would help if you put an and right between the two. And I said, oh, great idea. So the point is that this map has been evolving since it was a circle in '75 to what it looks like now. And the simplest element is actually the infinity loop. So if I were going to save anything, it'd just be the infinity loop with the two pole names and the fact that there's two upsides and two downsides, so the two pluses and the two minuses. And that's the essence. Because all theory has a combination of structure and dynamics. And so the structure is the infinity loop. The dynamics is the engine. It oscillates through that. So
Wow.
So if you've got questions, I'm glad to respond. But we may be out of time. I don't know what time it is or where we are. But
We have few questions if you have time for us in this conversation.
I have.
Yeah, at first, thank you so much for having us to understand more about your beautiful journey and the evolvement of the polarity map into what it is that being applied today, right? And Barry, if the first question that I have for you is, if we would love to apply the polarity thinking in our life,
Yeah.
and it would change a lot in the traditional way of thinking for us that we used to see, and and on every day is to solve problems with the either or. Now to the way that you say in that both ends, right? So what baby steps that Vivian, me, and the audience who listen to this conversation can start doing today so that we can break our traditional way of thinking and starting to build the habit of using polarity map and polarity thinking?
Okay, sure. So the first thing is to change the language a little bit from what you even requested. So you talked about breaking the either or thinking and moving to both and thinking. And what's really important to hear is that it's not about breaking either or thinking, it's about supplementing it. So either or thinking and basic problem solving is one pole of a polarity. So either or thinking and both and thinking is itself a polarity. They need each other. And we tend to be either or thinkers and problem solvers because it's such an essential foundation to language and getting along in the world and learning art and science and history. It's about differentiation, you know. So when we're very small, we teach our children, we touch the nose and we say, what is this? And we say, that's a nose, right? And so we're teaching them the difference between a nose and an ear and a chair and a car. And so all that differentiation, that's about, oh no, that's a car, it's not a nose, you know. It's absolutely essential. You can't learn language without, solving the problem about what is this. So all of language is built on definitions. And so So all of that learning science and history and about appreciate all of that stuff is about basic problem solving, and so that's essential. Now, the what both and thinking adds is it adds a dimension for thinking about our interdependency, and so I believe that divine unconditional love is manifest in our universal interdependence. And so this is where the book "And"
Mm.
is really an extension of the book "All" that I wrote back in 1965, right? Both of them just three-letter words, all and and. And so what I'm saying is that the divine universal divine unconditional love is manifest in our universal interdependence of everyone and everything, that interdependence. Now, as you get into the world of interdependency, the smallest interdependency is the pair. And so it's two, right? Now, the two could be really large. So it could be a country in the United Nations. So, but it's two. It's the part and the whole, right? So, but this understanding our interdependency through understanding interdependent pairs can help us through dealing with it's scalable to all sorts of system sizes. So, what I would encourage you to do first of all is to recognize that you're supplementing either or thinking with both and thinking. Those are absolutely essential. The next thing is to pick something that might be important to you, and you can play with it. So, for example, the polarity of taking care of my work life and taking care of my life outside of work, my home. Sometimes it's called work and home or personal and professional, but there's a dimension of life in which if you're not retired, you're working at something. And so how do I pay attention to the work and make sure I do a good job of that and take care of my relationships with friends and family? And you could create a polarity map in which you identify all the benefits of doing a good job at work. What are those benefits that accrue if I do a good job there? And then at home with my family and friends, what would be the benefits if I did a good job of that? And then so you'd write a polarity map, and once you've got the two upsides, I would encourage the person to start with the two upsides first, and you just write in those two upsides, and then once you've got the two upsides, the two downsides are just the loss of the two upsides. So, for example, if you focus on work to the neglect of home, then you end up with the loss of over-focusing on work is that you undermine your relationships, and you lose all the benefits of home and friends and family, right? If you focus on friends and family to the neglect of work, you lose all the benefits of work. So you can just put not in front of your two lists and put them in the diagonal, in the opposite lower side, right? So a polarity map has two diagonals in it. The two downsides, and you need to move from those two downsides towards the two upsides that are in the upper diagonals, and that's what it's about. And so that would be one thing that they could do. Now they could take any issue that they want, but that's one that all of us tend to face, right? Another one that they could look at would be about doing and being. It's parallel to that, but it's like letting myself doing things and letting myself be. So how do I take care of myself and just letting myself be? So this is different than work and home, because I might go home and just be busy doing at home, right? So I'm doing it at home and I'm doing it at work. But what about the polarity of for example, meditation, action and meditation. Richard Rohr's the community of action and meditation is uh, is a very powerful um, polarity. And so that would be another one that you could pay attention to. How do I just let myself be at peace, kind of centered, giving myself some time to just be centered and at peace regularly in a day, and of course, you know, be about uh, be about doing whatever change I want to make in the world.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, Vivian and I, we are working on a concept called newness.
Newness.
All
Yeah.
right, newness. The reason for that is we've been interviewing over 1,200 experts in 125 countries in all 7 continents, and we try to understand what made them awesome. Like in your situation, Barry, you open to new ideas. Your friend Johnny Waxberg, say that his father was doing something, and he said, "Okay, can you have his number?" And you start calling, and then that leading you to one job, and then leading you to the next one, leading you to the next one. So you always open to new idea and try to figure out something along that way, and perhaps that is something that leading you to the amazing work that you've been doing and having impact around the world with polarity map and polarity management. So we want to help people to get themselves more open to newness instead on the process of change. So to help them get out of the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so we want to hear from your perspective when you faced with something that new in your life, and what do you do with that to get you into it and make the best out of that?
Um, well, it's a great question, huh? So the first thing is that I encourage you to consider a dual message for your own pursuit that you're talking about. So I suggest that newness is a pole of a polarity, and that a very important pole. Um, the and so if you were to put newness as a pole, what would the other pole be in your coaching with others or talking with others, that would support them in embracing newness? So if newness would be all the benefits of newness that we're kind of talking about here. How do you get there? What's the benefits of newness? Um, I would suggest that I don't know what name is going to work for you and what you think would work for people you're talking with, but
Mm.
I encourage you to come up with a dual message and a dual strategy. That's the essence of polarity thinking, right? And so a single message, newness, without that second message, will undermine the ability of your people to access that pole, that essential pole, moving towards newness. And so there's going to be something in that infinity loop. There's newness, and there's something here that is, I don't know what you would call it, but there's going to be another dual message that I encourage you to have in your messaging going forward, and to be very explicit about it. Um,
Mm.
because if you're not explicit about it, they will assume that it's all about newness,
Yeah.
and it's not all about newness. And because newness is inherently unsustainable to the degree it's a pole of a polarity, it's like you advocating for inhaling, right?
Mm.
It's absolutely essential. That's not the question. The question is inhaling sustainable over time without something else? And the answer is no, it's not. And so, at least what most people are going to hear when you express newness is that you need to let go of a bunch of things, because new things are better than old things. Newness is good. Um, you're not saying this, but what is being heard by people,
Yeah.
right, is okay. If newness is good, what they're saying is, well, what I've got now is not good, or tradition is bad. What I'm doing is not okay. I need to do this newness thing in order to really be a better person, be more effective, be a better organization. And you're not saying that. I don't believe you're saying that, but
Mm.
I believe that that's what people will hear. They will hear you putting down things you're not putting down. And so, I would, that's, I think the most important thing that I would like you to consider out of this whole thing is that um, the the expression of newness, it would be good to supplement it with whatever you choose, but
Mm.
I wouldn't keep going with just newness alone into the future.
Wow. Thank you. And Dr. Johnson, the second thing that Vivian and I always ask all of the guests, because we would love to have people to improve their ability to think over the years, because so many things right now is affecting our thinking ability, right?
Yeah.
With the phones, there are a lot of things. So this is we want to pick on the practice that you've been using, so that you really having a sharp mind to remember days, memories, names, events, and a lot of things. So what have you been doing to helping you to continue to expand your ability to think over the years?
Um, well, one thing that I think is helpful is that I work out regularly, physically. So
Mm.
I'm in pretty good shape. I'll be 84 in a month, and I'm still working out 5 or 6 days a week, and so that's and I've been doing that for a number of years. Um, the other thing is that I do some meditation, not a lot of time, 10 minutes, um, 10 minutes a day. Um, and so uh, the other thing um, is that I'm just trying to think about what's regular in my life. Um, I pay attention to there's a Richard Rohr's morning meditations that I read every day. And what I do when I read those meditations, they're wonderful. They're based on, they fit exactly with my book All,
Mm.
because he's a wonderful mystic, a Catholic a priest, um, and um, so I read those meditations. And what I do is, if something really stands out for me, I will um, I will highlight it, and I keep a running book of quotes that come from, there's one quote within it's about, his meditations are maybe about a page long or so, maybe a page and a half of reading, but they're not real long, but they're every
Mm.
day, and I read them, and then there'll be one that just sort of stands out, and I think that one really moves me,
Wow.
uh, and so it's trying to read as a resonant listener or resonant reader, what resonates for me, and I highlight that, and I put the date and that outlined in, and I save all the meditations, the daily meditations. I just drop them onto my computer as an email. Just keep dropping them in. So if I wanted to see that whole email when I go through my book of quotes, then I can I leaf through those sometimes, and I say, oh, I want to go back to the whole context to see it. But that is a daily routine, paying attention to that, and I can share with you um, the meditation that I use that leads into my my 10-minute meditation, most of which is quiet. But the first couple of minutes, and what I do is I make the I'll just walk through the statements with you. And what I do, though, I do it more slowly, but I do it with taking a couple of breaths between each statement. And so it goes like this. In this moment, I am not trying to achieve anything. There are no goals. I am simply becoming aware of this moment. Becoming aware of my experience of this moment. As thoughts, concerns, or judgments come to mind, I will let them go for now. Focusing instead on my moment-to-moment experience of being present to what is. Divine unconditional love manifest in our universal interdependence. And for me, also manifest in the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Amen. So I just repeat those, and again take more time in between the breaths, and then I just sit still for the remainder of the 10 minutes. It takes me a couple of minutes. Sometimes when I'm working with people I was working with a group of Catholics on bringing peace to Europe, and I was in Poland, and I did that meditation for the whole group as a beginning. And the polarity that I wanted to start with them, they were wanting to know about how a polarity lens might be useful in bringing peace to Europe. And I talk about the polarity of being at peace and working for peace. And so that the importance of taking time to let yourself be at peace while you're also working for peace. So those are some things that help me. The other thing that helps me is one of my mentors, Jack Gibb, said that if we can see an individual or a team, an organization, or even a nation state, if we could see them completely, love would just be a natural byproduct of the seeing. Wow. And so I think that a polarity lens enhances our capacity to see another person more completely, or another organization or nation more completely. So it enhances our capacity to love. So that capacity to love, I think, comes from being loved, for sure. Being aware of being loved increases our capacity to love and respond to that experience of being loved. That's why divine unconditional love, the awareness of that, is so supportive. And another thing is to work with the assumption that if I could see others completely, love would be that result. And then I can be more intentional about attempting to see others more completely. And so it's a real gift. For example, your process that you have just engaged with me, in an effort to see me more completely by letting me tell my story, letting me talk on and on, um, is a wonderful, it's a wonderful expression of love, um, to uh, to engage seriously as you have and lovingly in wanting to see me more completely. That is about the most loving act that you could do for me, and I appreciate it very much.
Wow. So you said that your birthday is in a month time. What in
Yeah,
July? What day?
it's June 18th.
Oh, June 18. June 18.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna text you on June 18 to celebrate your 84th birthday. So I have the last question for this conversation.
Yes.
Okay, because I thought this on July, so I'm gonna ask you the last question because on July 5th, 1968, you came and you show up to reject the draft, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I bring you to the night before that.
Yeah.
So your son Luke, he was 2 weeks old back then,
Yes.
and I'm sure you had a lot of emotion running inside of you on that evening because you're not knowing about the future, what's going to be look like. There's a lot of people at stakes also because they're going to show up with you. Carol, Mr. Ransom, Mrs. Ransom, a lot of people showing up to support, and they're going to get into the consequences that are known to all of, everybody involved also. So now you, Vivian, and me, we're going to travel time. We're gonna get into your house back then. You're gonna meet that Barry on that July 4th evening. Okay? You're gonna talk to that young Barry Johnson about anything in life or anything. So what is that you're gonna tell him you wanna share with us now?
Um, well, I'm not clear of the question. What was you asking me? What I was thinking then, or what I would say now to him?
What do you say now to him if we
Oh,
can travel through time to meet him
okay,
on that
okay.
particular evening? Yes.
Um, um, hmm, um, um, I think I think I would say that I'm proud of you. Um, 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 yeah, um, yeah, that's what I'd say. I'm proud.
Mhm.
Um, what that reminds me of is my father fought in World War II, and he was one of my heroes. Um, and so I didn't know how he felt about the war in Vietnam, and he was he and my mom came to visit me from this small town in northern Wisconsin to East Harlem. They came to visit me that actually when Luke was being born. So they were there when Luke was born. So 2 weeks before I refused induction. He
Mm.
knew about my planning to refuse induction. He knew about my work against the war, but I hadn't talked with him about that. And so um, I asked him. So, Dad, I said, I know that, you, you fought in World War II, and I'm wondering how you feel about the fact that I'm refusing induction to go to Vietnam. And well, he said, if more people were doing what you're doing, maybe we wouldn't be there killing people.
Wow. Dr. Johnson, we're thankful for this beautiful opportunity to connect with you, to listen to your advice, your wisdom, to learn from your journey. And and I really appreciate that you spend time to share a lot of things that you're not sharing a lot, on the social media, on the interviews. And we love you, and we wish you and your family all the best always. I'll make sure that we get back to you on June 18th in celebrating of your birthday. And thank you for bring to life the polarity map that can help people to look at life in the bigger picture, in the in and help them to become to become better way in whatever they do in life, right? And we look forward to meeting you in person for sure if we have a chance, and we pray for that to happen. And yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. And
yeah.
I'd like to have a copy of this if I could. So
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So, how do you feel about sharing your story with us in this evening?
Oh, well, it was I haven't had the opportunity to share in this complete a way the different pieces that come to mind. I've shared various parts of it, but the combination, it was just enjoyable to take the trip. So
Wow.
thanks for arranging it. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Say hello to your family for us. Thank you very
I
much.
will. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye. Have a good day.
Okay. Bye.